Tonight, Canada officially recognizes a Palestinian state. Is free speech the real casualty as Jimmy Kimmel returns to late night TV?
And a new Cold War in the skies. Fighter jets and drone testing airspace boundaries in a dangerous game of cat and mouse.
From Montreal, I'm Eddie Tekalik.
And I'm Gary MacDonald. This is Night Talk Canada, episode 52. Let's get started.
Policy of the current Israeli government that there will be, and I quote, no Palestinian state. In this context, Canada recognizes the state of Palestine. We offer our full partnership in building the promise of a peaceful future for both the state of Palestine and the state of Israel. Excellencies, Canada is under no illusions that this recognition is a panacea. This recognition is, however, firmly aligned with the principles of self-determination and fundamental human rights in the UN Charter, and it is fundamentally consistent with the policy of the Canadian government for generations. We take this action as part of a coordinated effort led by France and Saudi Arabia, a coordinated effort to provide the possibility of peace and a two-state solution.
Canada has formally recognized a Palestinian state, joining over 140 countries worldwide. The move marks a major shift in Canadian foreign policy, raising questions about relations with Israel, Canada's role in Middle East peace efforts, and political implications at home. And as you heard the Prime Minister speaking at the United Nations earlier this week and putting it out there, although he did come out with this a couple of weeks ago, but it was formalized in his speech to the United Nations yesterday, or Monday. Anyway, he formalized it with that speech, and it was well received in the chamber for sure. However, there was one fly in the ointment for Canada, France, the United Kingdom, Australia, and others who are supporting this, and that is the United States. U.S. President Donald Trump addressed the UN yesterday, and this is what he had to say.
As everyone knows, I have also been deeply engaged in seeking a ceasefire in Gaza. Have to get that done. Have to get it done. Unfortunately, Hamas has repeatedly rejected reasonable offers to make peace. We can't forget October 7th, can we? Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire. Instead of giving to Hamas and giving so much, because they have taken so much, this could have been solved so long ago. But instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now.
And that was part of his 1 hour, a little over an hour speech that he gave that was all over the map, quite literally. However, that's him. He's out of the way now. We know he's not happy about it. Oh, well. Now, the one thing that came to my mind when the Prime Minister first brought this up and then said he was going to the United Nations and they were going to make the formal declaration at the UN this week was, given the situation, should that not actually come to Parliament and get parliamentary approval, be debated in the House of Commons? I, as a citizen of the country, I may not agree with this move.
Right.
And I would like my elected representative to at least take part in some kind of a debate. Whether it ends up that the resolution is approved, that's fine. Okay, great. You know, the best debater wins. But I really have a problem with this particular issue. And so I went digging, and here's what I found. In Canada, a prime minister or the government as a whole can make foreign policy statements, including recognizing or supporting another state, without requiring prior approval from the House of Commons. Recognition of states and governments is considered a prerogative of the Crown, exercised on the advice of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, not Parliament. Now, that said, there are a few nuances. Parliamentary approval is only required if recognition carries legislative, financial, or treaty obligations, for example, ratifying an agreement, approving aid packages, adjusting sanctions regimes. The House of Commons can pass motions expressing support or opposition, which carry political weight but are not binding on the executive. And politically, a prime minister would usually want to ensure they have at least a majority support in the Commons to avoid backlash, but legally the government can proceed without a vote. So if the prime minister says Canada supports a Palestinian state, that's within the government's authority. If he moves to sign treaties, open an embassy, or provide financial assistance, then parliamentary process may get involved.
Mm-hmm.
I found that interesting. Again, as I say, to me, and especially where we know that this is a very sensitive issue.
Yeah.
And I just feel that perhaps it would have been best aired in the Commons and have a formal debate and a formal vote on it to show that, in fact, the Prime Minister does have the backing of the entire House, and as a result of the people of Canada, because, that's who they represent, right? But that did not happen. And I'm still not convinced. To me, it's just a lot of words. And nothing good is going to come of it. Israel's upset.
Yeah.
The U.S. is not happy about it. But the fact of the matter is, as I say, it's a very sensitive, politically sensitive issue to be just stomping out. And God knows that with the turmoil that has gone on in the Mideast forever, at least in my lifetime, that have been able to witness and remember, it's nothing's going to come of it. And if you do manage to get some kind of a peace, how long is it going to last, Eddie? How long will it last? What's going to be gained?
Well, Gary, I mean, you're speaking about lifetimes. This, and there's no right or wrong here. Okay, it's not whether a country has the legal right to form a country or not, but in that area with Israel, that has been going on since, I believe, 1948, when the sovereign state of Israel was recognized by the UN and the rest of the world. And I think I agree with you, Gary. It's been problematic since then. It's been very problematic, especially in the 60s and 70s. Our peacekeeping forces were actually there in the 70s. And I don't think that region is going to see any level of sustainable peace, whether it's the conflict between Israel and surrounding neighbors and Hamas, or with some of the other Middle Eastern and Arab states. It's just been an ongoing conflict, at least in my lifetime, especially the last 30 to 40 years. So you kind of ask yourself, all right, nothing is going to happen of this. They're going to continue fighting. I guess the question begs to be answered is, do we do nothing and just let it happen whatever happens, let bygones be bygones, or do sovereign nations such as ours and those in Europe try to do something about it, whether it's through through economic force or by way of the gun? I really don't know, Gary. I kind of lean towards saying something rather than standing by and saying nothing, as the aforementioned country that abstained from providing any support was very critical of us. But you know what, Gary, in our particular case, Carney and Canada making that statement in the United Nations, it pretty much goes in line with half a dozen European powers that basically threw their hat into the ring as well. So, are we wrong in doing so? My opinion is no, in terms of a global support to the Palestine nation. It doesn't support or condone what's going on with Hamas. It definitely doesn't support the Hamas initiative there. It was not a recognition of Hamas. And by the same token, it's not condoning or criticize Israel by actually doing this. I think it's Canada as a G7 country, a well-respected country, is taking a position. Now, how much money is going to get involved with that? How much effort's going to be involved here? Are we going to be pushing an economic envelope, penalties? I really don't know. Is it going to be boots on the ground at some point? Well, it may not be just Canadian boots. I think it'll probably, if there are boots on the ground there, it'll probably be more of an international force that's going to be landing in the zone. Is it going to solve anything? Maybe short term, but Gary, I don't think it's going to last. It's not going to last very long. So,
No.
you know what? I agree with you that, that Prime Minister Carney should have presented this in the House for open debate, even though at the end of the day, he still would have proceeded in making that statement. The proper venue to make such a statement, I believe, is there in the United Nations, in the General Assembly. I know that Prime Minister Carney made some statements 2 weeks ago, I think it was, 3 weeks ago, that Canada is looking at, and he signed some documentation looking at recognizing Palestine as a state from a statehood perspective. So it didn't come as a surprise to members of Parliament. It did not come as a surprise to Canadian citizens, or at least those that are paying attention to what's going on with their country around the world. So it's not a tremendous big surprise, but I do agree with you. This is something of significant importance, and it should have gone up for at least debate by our elected members of Parliament, and then move forward. Or are we dealing with a situation where, you know what, the General Assembly for the United Nations was this week and he was pressed for time? I've heard that coming up as an excuse, and you know what? I don't think you can hold that as an excuse. Question period is pretty much every day. It could have been tossed out for a discussion, and he chose not to do it. So, look, he made a decision as a prime minister based on your great research there. He had every right to do what he did. But I agree with you. It would have been nice to actually have that type of a debate in our government, in our parliament, and then move forward with whatever statements he had to make in the United Nations. Apart from that, okay, I am actually quite proud that Canada did put their foot down in such a huge venue of importance, the General Assembly of the United Nations. And we talked about how Canada has been in the background for at least the last 10 to 15 years when it came to any global issues. And the one part I am happy about and quite proud for Canada is that we took a position on the global stage. I mean, an actual position. You're right. What is going to come of that? Time is going to tell. But I was really happy to see Carney take a position with his allies in Europe in terms of recognizing the Palestinian state, except we have the United States who abstained from it, and expectedly so, while their bosses were watching from the Israeli booth. So, it's a no-win situation. It's a win-win situation. I kind of err on the side of let's try to do something. And I'm not saying who's right or who's wrong in this conflict. I'm just saying that we need to do something to stop what's going on there as best we can.
Okay, let's catch up with a couple of comments and go to Joe. Joe, welcome back. It's been a while.
Oh, welcome back.
Yeah. So right off the bat, just after the clip of the president, he comes up with an orange fly in the ointment. And then as we move along, he offers up, after generations of conflict and bloodshed, I'm not holding my breath to see peace in my lifetime, but one can only hope. And you know, Joe, I know exactly what you're saying there, because chances, to me, as far as I'm concerned, slim and none. And no matter what we do, there's no way. Anyway, let's look at a couple of other things. Like, first of all, the Prime Minister really did put a good showing on for Canada at the UN. Certainly, he left a very positive impression, it seems, on most of the delegates to the General Assembly. And his wife took part yesterday in the push to bring the Ukrainian children that were kidnapped by the Russians, to bring them home. And she actually spoke. And again, Canada came away with people were really sitting up and taking notice. And now we have a power couple with Carney and his wife, and taking on, getting in there and rolling up the sleeves to deal with the Ukrainian children. And frankly, it's heartbreaking to hear what that war has brought about, and how these kids were hauled off and they've been living in Russia, and it's just beyond. But let's look overall at the impact. The diplomatic impact, of course, is, as we've said, Canada aligns with much of the international community, but risks straining relations with Israel and the US. Well, I think that's well underway anyway.
Yeah.
Domestically, the decision could split opinion among Canadian voters and parties. Haven't heard a whole lot yet along those lines, but I'm sure that we will as the days wear on, probably into the weekend. And I would not be surprised, Eddie, I would not be surprised if we see some kind of major demonstration in the downtown this weekend. And I'll leave it at that. The peace process. Does recognition help advance negotiations or harden divisions? I don't think it's going to help advance negotiations at all. To me, it's just going to harden the divisions over there, just drive the wedge in that much deeper. That's how I see it. So, why does it matter? I guess, well, it's a historic foreign policy pivot that could redefine Canada's voice on the global stage, influence trade and security relationships, and spark debate at home about Canada's role in global conflicts. And you will recall, like back in the 60s into the 70s, even into the early 80s, Canada was known as a peacekeeper. And whenever there was a special force, and usually a United Nations force, when the United Nations actually seemed to be doing something and accomplishing something, they would call upon Canada usually first, or Canada would be the first or among the top 2 or 3 to volunteer to send troops over on peacekeeping missions. And I can tell you, living in Base Gagetown, growing up in the Base Gagetown area, more often than not, there were countless days and sometimes nights where the Air Force Hercs would be coming and going because they were loading and shuffling troops over and equipment over to wherever the latest hotspot was, everything from Cyprus right on through. So we don't seem to have that designation now. And if you recall, Lester Pearson was, as Prime Minister, a Liberal Prime Minister, was known as a real peacekeeper
Hmm.
in promoting peace. But over the years, well, really in the last 10 years, we lost a lot of I won't say clout, but a lot of recognition and respect on the world stage. And I think we all know why, so we won't
Yeah.
have to go into that because I'll just go off on another tirade. So anyway, I the words sound great. The UN, as far as I'm concerned, is now nothing more than a waste of time,
Hmm.
really. It can't doesn't seem to be able to accomplish anything of significance now. Um, so why are we even involved? It may have been great when it was set up just after the Second World War,
Hmm.
going in through that period of the Cold War, and some of the conflicts that popped up, but it does not have the prominence, the respect
That it
that it
once
once
did.
had on the world stage.
Well, you look at it too, though, Gary. I mean, okay, fine. It's a forum for foreign powers to declare their intentions and boast in one particular case. But without the United Nations, I mean, if Canada and its allies that are there to declare support for a sovereign Palestinian state and peacekeeping efforts are necessary with boots on the ground, they don't necessarily need the United Nations approval to do so. It's just a question of the coalition members of going anywhere in the world for peacekeeping efforts to put boots on the ground. It's a coalition that's done through the foreign ministries, and if 4 or 5 countries want to go on a peacekeeping initiative, they can do so on their own without the UN's approval. They're just going to go
Oh
ahead
yeah,
and do it. So I kind of agree with you. The UN is it's more of a formality. I'm not sure it's considered posturing. It's just not as effective as I would like them to be. It's almost like they kind of remind me of FIFA, except they don't make a fortune. It's just a governing body to expose clout and say we're important and beat their chests and then go on about their way. I really don't see where it's a viable entity the way it used to be, especially with the way the world is today. There's
yeah,
just they got a long way to catch up, and it's almost like they're still functioning in a mode of the 1960s, where there was world turmoil. We had the Cold War coming at full force, and debates and posturing, and was at that particular time was probably an important venue for the world's leaders to debate and try to define policy and maybe even bring around peace, by discussion. But I still think they're stuck in the 50s and 60s. They just have not evolved to what we're dealing with today. You know, uh, we're dealing with call it an axis of evil, whatever you want to call it, and it's continuing to grow. Meanwhile, the United Nations hasn't really done anything, and the leaders of the world, our European allies and Canada, actually had to stand up and put their foot down. Has anybody said anything to the United Nations, especially the Secretary General there, about coming up with a peace plan through the United Nations efforts in that region? I don't recall anything about that at all between Israel and Palestine and what's going on there. As a matter of fact, you don't hear very much from them about any conflicts around the world. Um, so I would agree with you 100%, Gary. Nice place to visit for tourists, beautiful flags outside, but I think their functionality basically died 20, 30 years ago. They're just not up with the times in terms of how to deal with today's brand of world leader, if you want to put it.
yeah, yeah. No question. Um, and again, I come back around to all of the words over the last couple of days related to Israel and Palestine and a recognized state and so on. And what's happening over there it's gruesome. It really is
It
gruesome.
is. Yeah.
Uh, you have a lot of innocent people who are ill, hungry, wounded, and have died.
Yeah.
And for what? However, you know, these groups like Hamas, for example, they knew what they were doing on October 7th, 2 years ago,
Hmm.
when they went in and did the raid in Israel and took the hostages and so on. Israel is like the big bear of the Mideast. You don't go and poke the bear and think you're going to get away with it. You don't mess around with the Israelis. And, you know, like they've gone in and they're there now to, in their thinking anyway, from what I can see, they want to just put an end to it once and for all. And they
The
won't
final
stop until,
solution.
yeah, until they're, basically scorched earth, a scorched earth solution. And they're not going to stop. They're just
It
not going to
doesn't seem
stop.
like that.
No,
It doesn't
until
seem
they,
that way.
yeah,
We're
until
always
they
hopeful that
accomplish
they
it.
are, but they're just not doing it.
And unfortunately, a lot of people are going to continue to die until they reach a point that they feel they've accomplished their mission. And like I say, Hamas poked the bear, and they knew what they were doing. And if you recall 2 years ago, and we discussed this last year a couple of times, just how well organized all of the protests were and everything, almost like bang, clockwork,
Hmm.
right? All of the protests started rolling out. To me, the whole thing was a very well orchestrated plan between the raid and the kidnapping and then the protests breaking out, around the world. And it was just what we used to feel was over there, and we'd hear about it and watch about it on TV news and read about it, um, very quickly was brought home and brought home to a lot of countries like Canada.
Hmm.
And like we're walking, I mean, what have we done to deserve some of what took place? And you know, Eddie, when you look at some of the protests that were held across this country, those protests were definitely meant to disrupt.
Yeah.
It had
We saw it
nothing to
right
do
here in our
really
backyard.
with the protesting anything. It was, to me, a total effort to disrupt our way of life.
Hmm.
And for some of those protests to drag on as long as they did, they had to be financed and financed from offshore.
Yeah. And we saw what two major disturbances here in Montreal. We had McGill
Exactly.
University and we
Yeah.
had Victoria Square.
Yeah.
It was absolute bedlam for months here in Montreal with McGill University. And I mean, there had to be some substantial funding in order for any organization to sustain that type of uh, to sustain that kind of pressure and craziness in terms of their I won't even call it a demonstration. I mean, a demonstration is about proving a point and getting on with it and discussion and dialogue. There was none of that. It was just basically occupation in my books. And I think both you and I agreed that we in Canada we have the right to protest, and these individuals protested within the confines of the law. I think you and I were both for it. But then it
Yeah.
actually evolved into property damage, assaults, berating people on the street, blocking traffic without permits, and so it got to a point where it was just completely disruptive. And even you and I, who can be pretty patient with things, actually grew extremely impatient with. Then we've actually voiced our concern on one of our broadcasts that enough is enough. Make a
Mhm.
point. protest, but stop harassing people and stop damaging private property. It just wasn't right. So I think you're right, Gary. There was money coming in from somewhere to fund the extent of these demonstrations and sit-ins and occupations of private property. And then, of course, both you and I criticize our municipal and provincial governments for abstaining responsibility to doing anything about it because they basically point, well, it's the police force. Well, the police force is waiting for orders. So well orchestrated, Gary. I never equated it quite that way, but you're making absolute sense. That was, and you know what? If you think about how many of these happen globally simultaneously, there had to
Exactly.
be some kind of organization. It
Yep.
wasn't like one here and one there. They almost happened within 7 days, all within each other, globally, right around the planet. So yeah, it's very ugly, Gary. I don't. As Joe said, you really, really hope, and wish that, uh, you know, common sense starts to prevail. That peace will come, but even if the fighting does stop, there's going to be something that's going to trigger some fight. If not now, few months or a few years from now, somebody else is going to be in charge, and the whole damn thing's going to start all over again. So, what is the solution at the end of the day? I don't think anyone has one. I think we're just going to globally have to deal with what gets tossed our way, from 1 month or one year to the next, and deal with it. Very, very sad to see.
Yep. Well, at least I guess our upside takeaways are, as usual, the Prime Minister represented us on the world stage in a very diplomatic, statesman-like manner. His wife, the same, in joining the conversation and taking part in the organization of trying to bring the Ukrainian children home that are being held by Russia at the moment. So we had, as I said earlier, a power couple at the United Nations and putting Canada front and center in a very, very positive light. Whether you agree with the support for the Palestinian state, the fact of the matter is, Prime Minister and his government, and ultimately the Prime Minister made the decision to do so, felt it was the right thing to do, and went and did it in a very, as I say, statesman-like manner,
Mhm.
turned a lot of heads, and you know what, as you know, you can say, Canada's back, baby.
Yeah, not I would notch this one up as a internationally for Prime Minister Carney and his government of Canada. I think it's a notch in the win column internationally for Prime Minister Carney on this one.
Yeah, very much so. All right, coming up, the creeping push to harness free speech, especially in the US. Think about that one for a minute. But first, meet Ecamm Live. It's the leading live streaming and video production studio built for Mac, and it is what is bringing this stream to you tonight. Ecamm allows you to customize scenes, effects, overlays, comments, and guests, whether live, streaming, or recording, or both. And for more information, just go down to the link in the description below, click on it. It's an affiliate link, and there's an opportunity for a 14-day free trial.
And Gary, just following up on your quick intro, Jimmy Kimmel's return to late night TV comes amid heightened debate over what comedians can and cannot say. His comeback symbolizes the broader tension between free expression and the growing influence of cancel culture, corporate sensitivities, and political correctness in the media.
And it was quite a comeback last night. Very emotional at one point in his opening monologue. And
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see exactly how Disney made the pivot from all of a sudden off the air. And of course, they called it basically a timeout, which I don't know. I don't think it was a timeout. I think it was going in the direction of trying to appease the US president,
Right.
frankly. But here's the thing. The other day, after this was announced, there was something that rolled across one of the tickers. And the Disney Plus page that you log into to update your account, it was crashing because so many people were logging in to cancel their Disney and Hulu accounts, and
Hulu. Right.
is it ESPN and a couple of the others, crashing because of the onslaught. And of course, you had demonstrations outside of the theater where this show is recorded live, and it was just snowballing big time. And we'll get into the free speech part of it, but let's go back about a week. And here is what was the first shot that was fired in this assault on freedom of speech in the United States. And let's look at the clip of the monologue that brought the house down.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between the finger pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half-staff, which got some criticism. But on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty.
Yes. Okay. He's at the fourth stage of grief, construction. There's demolition, construction. This is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he called a friend. This is how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish.
Gary, I know. Oh, I haven't seen you since that happened, but Gary, you know what? Don't tell me that this entire episode had nothing to do with El Presidente's feelings being hurt, and this had absolutely nothing to do with the tragedy of Charlie Kirk's death. Zippo. I don't care what, who, where, anything will convince me it was other than that. The entire episode was because of Donald Trump not liking truth, facts. I don't know. But that moment there was an absolute wow in terms of how Jimmy Kimmel presented that in a satirical but an honest and truthful way, which personified the true nature of the President of the United States and this entire this tragic death of Charlie Kirk. Go ahead, hold your head again.
I can understand some people saying that, okay, it was a very sensitive time, and perhaps could have held off on that particular segment for a couple of days, a day, 2 days, whatever. I could understand an argument being made in that direction, but I've watched that clip a couple of times now, well, more than a couple actually. And when I listened to it, and there was nothing disrespectful to the victim of the crime.
No.
There was really nothing disrespectful to the main ingredient here. He brought the disrespect all on by himself. It was his. He's,
Yeah.
it's his to wear. So, frankly, and what he said about the weekend was true as well, because I remember seeing story after story about, you know, congressmen and senators and mega supporters all of a sudden pointing the finger at the accused in the case as, oh yeah, the family's Republican and blah 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 blah, but he's leaning left. Really?
Yeah. Well,
And
and then
nobody
the
called
media,
them out.
yeah, and then the media spinning it to, I think there was one representative spinning it that, oh, you know what, he went to school at the university for the year, and that's where he was radicalized to the left for going to university. So what's the message? Don't send your kids to school. Like, I just it just flabbergasted me the tomfoolery that we're hearing on a consistent basis from some of the media, the state-controlled media being Fox, the people on there that were being interviewed, the reporting that you saw on Newsmax, for example. I couldn't believe what I was actually hearing. Supposedly educated and intelligent people say and how they try to spin this thing. And you know what? They were spinning it away, believe it or not, in my opinion, away from the tragedy of Charlie Kirk's death. Nobody should get shot for their opinions, okay? Um, Political opinions or otherwise. It's just horrible. And then to see right-wing media spin away from the tragedy of the death and start looking for someone to blame as opposed to help, MAGA or the conservative population of the United States, help them through a grieving process or period. There was none of that, which I
No,
find
no,
completely unexpected, to tell you the truth. I thought they would have spent a little bit more time mourning the loss of Charlie Kirk. Because you know what? Quite honestly, Gary, this can happen to anybody. This can
for
happen to
sure.
some of the
Yeah,
intelligent people that are debating the anti regime right now. They're at risk as well. You just don't know. So it's just adding fuel to a fire that's already burning quite nicely right now, which is irresponsible in my opinion. It's very irresponsible, and you're absolutely right. Had the Trumpster not made a stupid, vile move by not even spending more than one sentence on the death of his supposed good friend Charlie Kirk, and hey, look at my construction going on here. If that isn't food and fodder for the comedian, I don't know what is. Can you imagine the late great George Carlin
oh yeah.
being exposed to that?
Yeah,
Just think about what would have happened. So, you know what? I cycle back to what I said at the beginning, Gary. Absolute tragedy, but this had nothing to do um, with Kimmel's commentary on Charlie Kirk. He didn't say anything out of line. Yes, maybe he could have waited a day or two, but I listened to it 4 or 5 times myself, and I was trying to look at it and listen to it objectively. It just wasn't there. The smoking gun was just not there.
no.
So you kind of step back and say, well, why was he actually fired, and why is he back? Why is he back so quickly if it was such a huge travesty?
Yeah. Well, let's catch up on a couple of comments. And Joe weighs in with, what an absolute self centered clown, no compassion whatsoever. And Monel says, oh, it was online university for one semester
Mm,
for the accused. So
yeah.
the going beyond what happened to Kimmel and when on Air Force One, and I think they were either flying to or flying back from one of the memorial services for Kirk,
Hmm.
and a reporter asked Trump about this whole thing. And Trump basically said, a lot of the networks are not very nice to me. And he's, maybe I'll just come after their licenses.
Right.
As the leader of a free nation, a supposed free nation, that's not something you say that you're going to go after the journalists in that kind of a fashion. That was a clear threat that if you don't say nice things about me, then I'm coming after you, and you won't have a job, you won't have a network, you won't have a TV station, whatever. Now, last night's return of Kimmel was not carried on that cluster of stations owned by Sinclair Broadcasting.
Sinclair, yeah. I think there's 22
yeah,
stations that they own.
And that includes up through the northeast or northwest area.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't go making statements like trying to control the media the way that he has, because they're calling him on his crap. So, and Monel just popped in with the U.S. is no longer a free nation. Don't disagree with you there at all, Monel, in the direction it's going. And yet it's taking forever for a lot of the Americans to really begin to realize what the hell is happening to them. Now, let's fast forward to last night when Kimmel made his return, and here's some of what he had to say.
That our government cannot be allowed to control what we do and do not say on television, and that we have to stand up to it. I've been hearing a lot about what I need to say and do tonight, and the truth is, I don't think what I have to say is going to make much of a difference. If you like me, you like me. If you don't, you don't. I have no illusions about changing anyone's mind. But I do want to make something clear because it's important to me as a human, and that is, you understand that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man. I don't think there's anything funny about it. I posted a message on Instagram on the day he was killed, sending love to his family and asking for compassion, and I meant it, and I still do. Nor was it my intention to blame any specific group for the actions of what it was obviously a deeply disturbed individual. That was really the opposite of the point I was trying to make, but I understand that to some that felt either ill-timed or unclear, or maybe both. And for those who think I did point a finger, I get why you're upset. If the situation was reversed, there's a good chance I'd have felt the same way. I have many friends and family members on the other side who I love and remain close to, even though we don't agree on politics at all. I don't think the murderer who shot Charlie Kirk represents anyone. This was a sick person who believed violence was a solution, and it isn't. Ever.
You know what? I watched that entire 25-minute monologue at the beginning, and then I watched his comedy monologue after that. The first 25 minutes, I think I had to fight back tears 2 or 3 times. I understood the man. I felt the man. I felt the struggles he was going through as a result of not getting. I don't think it's him being pulled off the air for a week, but the struggles that the human being had, the individual, and Jimmy Kimmel had in dealing with the fallout as a result of him feeling for this young man who was outright assassinated and murdered, and that a good chunk of the world was pointing a finger at him for being bad. He was very genuine. He came across as very genuine. He made his points very clearly. He made the apologies. He didn't, outright apologize, but he basically confessed to what he was feeling, and he opened his kimono to anybody that was watching. And boy, in terms of watching, the YouTube, typical daily hit mark was about 240,000 hits a day on his episodes. I think that one hit something like 14 to 50 million hits. So you know what? I'm very hopeful that his message got across, not just his conviction came across to the people who regularly watch him and those who typically don't tune into him or don't agree with his politics, to actually see a man struggling with what he's gone through in the last week, and a man struggling to come to terms with someone in the United States being assassinated for his political views. He laid it out on the table, Gary, and I two or three times I had to hold back the tears in terms of how it impacted me. You know, certainly was it was well worth the watch.
I have to say, in watching him and listening to what he said about what happened after he was suspended, and sitting down and meeting with the ABC brass and some of the Disney brass in there as well, and discussing the whole thing, going back and forth, and coming out of it and coming back on the air, much to the chagrin of the president, and doing so without having to read any kind of a formal statement that was drafted by the legal beagles working for ABC/Disney. I think it speaks volumes of what ABC's management is about. However, let's not be too easy, because not only were they losing subscribers, like it was a flood, but also Disney itself, the theme parks, are taking a hit.
Yeah.
And so it was as much about the dollar here as it was about free speech, and maybe a little bit more about the dollar than free speech. But they still, even though the dollar was involved, they stood their ground against the threats made by a president of the United States when asked a question about what are you going to do if he comes back, kind of thing. Well, I'm going after all of the networks that are not nice to me.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that was totally his intent.
Yeah.
For sure. So I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when he got word that Kimmel was coming back, and then that Kimmel did not make any formal apology to him, or had to read any kind of a legally drafted statement. Because I get that whole scenario. I've been there when I was hosting talk shows. Totally get it. That all of a sudden you have a show and an issue that really is a divisive issue in the community, and something happens and you have to talk about it again or bring it up for the first time, and things are said, people are not happy on either side, and all hell breaks loose. The first thing you know, you get the phone call from the front office. The GM wants to see you, and you go in and you sit down and you have a conversation, and the GM is getting pressure from corporate upstairs, and it's an interesting scenario to go through. Not always pleasant, but if you're a person of conviction and you know that what you did was in the best interest of the community and the issue being discussed, even if it did not land well with certain groups or certain people, then you stay your game. And ultimately, it comes down to a question of, okay, you either do this or you do this, and you've got a choice. You either cave and do what they say and lose all credibility on the air, and your station loses all credibility, or you just say, you know what? No, I've drawn my line in the sand. I'm out of here. Gone.
Yeah.
And there are other times, that you walk in and all levels of management are saying, yeah, bang on, like you hit it on the head. And yeah, we're prepared to take some flack for it. So it's something to experience. Like you have to really be on a part of that experience. You have to be the lightning rod and to get a real feel for what Kimmel's gone through over the last few days. And again, Disney and ABC, do they bow to the president, or do they say, you know what, like we're taking a real hit on the dollar side of things? He's not worth it. Well, we're going to go with our consumers. So anyway, but each time that kind of a statement is made by the president or any of his gang that he's surrounded himself with, it's always like that's one more little chink in the armor of free speech.
Yeah. It just eroded the First Amendment completely.
Yep. And the snowball starts to roll. And once that snowball starts to roll, it's pretty hard to stop it and pull it back.
Well, I mean, you hear comparisons with some of the other strongman countries, like in Russia. Well, do you know what happens to TV personalities and comedians and even reporters in said country? You look at Saudi Arabia. Well, you know what? You don't last too long if you criticize the crown prince. You look at places like Turkey in some cases, in Egypt. Is that where the United States of America is heading? I think is a genuine question that a lot of people are asking themselves. Listen, you and I live in Canada. We're asking ourselves that question. Is the United States of America heading down? And I'm not saying heading down very slowly. Since January, it seems to be steamrolling towards what you and I hope wouldn't happen, is becoming a totalitarian, authoritarian country. Especially when you look at something like the First Amendment, which essentially allows the United States to continue being the United States, pretty much being eroded since Inauguration Day back in January of this year. So, if the El Presidente wants to continue to strong arm mob bullying tactics with the media, I mean, I'm talking right across the board. We're talking about the networks, such as we've seen with Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert, him threatening the comedians that work at NBC, lawsuits to a lot of the major against a lot of the major newspapers throughout the entire country. I mean, Gary, what's next? Is he going to have a stronghold or a mechanism to threaten social media, threaten Google? You and I doing a show like this in Canada, are we going to be susceptible to some sort of violations that he's going to come up with against Canada? How about the people like you and I who are doing this in the United States on a regular and consistent basis? Is he going to go after the regular citizens for expressing and legally applying their First Amendment rights? And that's what scares me in your statement, Gary. Right now, it doesn't seem to me that there's nothing in place to stop him from doing so. How far is this going to go? And once he gets to the point where he has full control of the media, this is 1935 Germany, my friend. This is complete and absolute control of what a population consumes. And he will completely define what the message is going to be through. Then it becomes a propaganda chain more than anything else. And as a consequence, free speech, I think, around the world consequently might suffer, because what other countries are going to look at this and say, hey, Mr. Strongman of country B says, hey, if the United States can do it, maybe I can do it. So I don't know, man. Is the world spiraling out of control because of one individual? I don't know. Some will say yes, some will say no. But in this particular case, it's extremely, extremely concerning and scary that one individual can strong arm huge corporations to his will and to his whim. And unfortunately, a lot of it has to do with the almighty dollar. And in my opinion, one of the reasons that Jimmy is back is not because he's making more money out of this whole deal. I think that Jimmy went back into the services of ABC and Disney's because he's got 250 plus employees working for him on that show. He probably decided, in my opinion, to go back because he cares about these 250 people that inevitably could have lost their jobs. And Disney and ABC be damned. I mean, they lost billions of dollars in terms of, especially Disney, in a matter of a week they lost billions of dollars. A lot of credibility. I don't think they're going to get the subscribership back to the levels they had it before. It's going to take some time. And you know what? I mean, Disney's already suffering the consequences of people not traveling to the United States in these warmer regions of the United States. So just from a tourism perspective, Disney was already suffering less people at the gates. And you know what? This unfortunate incident perpetuated by the President of the United States is not, like you were saying, is not doing them any good again. On top of everything else, at the turnstiles at the Disney theme parks, it's just awful, absolutely awful, Gary. And my biggest concern, yeah, dollars and cents for the United States, that it's business. My concern is for the rights of journalists, media types to be able to correctly and truthfully express themselves the way it needs to be expressed. Otherwise, you know what? They're going to have to change the name from the United States of America to something else completely different. It's just really sad and unfortunate, Gary. And thank you for being honest about your experiences being a broadcast journalist. I can imagine the things that going through your head in terms of somebody trying to impose their thoughts and their will on you from expressing what you needed to express. So I really appreciate you being honest about that.
Well, let me kind of round things out here, and then we'll catch up on some comments and move on. But here in Canada, don't think we are above what's happening in the U.S. Not in the same manner, but over the last 10 to 15 years, there has been a movement where your communications people, your PR people are really taking control of the message. And when I say that, it's getting harder to get information from various government departments, whether you're talking federal, provincial, or municipal. It's getting more difficult to get information from various large corporations because the message is being controlled. It's even difficult now to get information from your municipal police and the RCMP on various things that happen through the day, through the night, over the weekend, and even fire departments too. It's getting much more difficult. You may hear something about a fire. Let's say there's a major fire somewhere. You may hear about it 2 or 3 days later. And why? You're asking yourself, why am I only hearing about this now? That was a huge fire, blah, blah, blah. It's because no one will turn over any information, will cooperate, will provide the very basics, the who, what, where, when, why, and how to the media. Very early on, a number of years ago, the RCMP started to only giving out names of people if they were given permission to do so. And of course, you can't give out someone's name if they've been charged, but they have not appeared in court. They've been arrested, but they have not appeared in court. If they have not yet appeared in court and had the charges formally read, then you can't use their name. That I get. But the chokehold that communications people have now at the behest of the various levels of government, it's just unbelievable. And one phrase that drives me right off the end of the earth whenever I hear it is, oh, we can't give you that because of privacy concerns. That is that's the weakest excuse that you can give, but it also puts up one of the most solid walls as far as getting any information about something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there. It exists in Canada. It's not in the same manner as what you're seeing happening in the US or what you see happen in places like Russia and China and other countries like that. But there is a chokehold on information flow. And
well, let me ask
when
you,
it
Gary.
does come out, it's very, very controlled. And it's getting more difficult to get around that end.
Do you think our journalists and our news people here in Canada, that their rights are being suppressed from either municipal, provincial, or the federal government in terms of what you can or cannot say? And do journalists in Canada fear consequences in terms of executing their right to report honestly and truthfully? Do you feel
No,
that's happening
no,
in Canada as well?
no, we're not at that extreme. We're at a point where it's become a profession all of its own as far as communications and controlling the message.
Mm-hmm.
The rights aren't being hindered at this stage of the game. And journalists in this country, aside from bearing the wrath of somebody, why did you write it this way? Blah 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 blah. Yeah, that an angry reaction.
But you're not being threatened.
No. However, all I'm saying is that we're not totally innocent here. And when I use the term, the creeping war on free speech,
Mm-hmm.
whether you realize it or not, the moment that I, as a journalist, cannot get information confirmed or get information from a certain level of government or even a company, then your right to information as an individual, as a resident, has been hindered as well. And for what? And then they wonder why they have a lot of conspiracy theories running around, like, what are they hiding? And
right.
It's because of that. Just go out, meet it head on, answer the the who, what, where, when, why, and you've laid it out. You've given them the information they need, and if there's something that develops beyond that, then you meet it head on again. But anyway, that's a whole other issue, and I will not take any more time and bore people either. So let's have a quick look at some comments here, because Monel and Joe have been quite active on this one. Okay, let's... where to go here? Here we go. She said Trump gave Kimmel a great boost from 240,000 views to 16 million views. And then Joe comes along with, Kimmel was giving T-Rump a headache, but T-Rump would not take the prescribed acetamin, am I saying that right? Tylenol. That was the best comedy routine of the week,
Yeah, it
that news
certainly was.
conference. Unfortunately, they were spreading all kinds of unsubstantiated information.
Right.
And then Monel said, and Joe, don't forget what is it, Aberbagian? Is that how he said it?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, yeah, Monel, haha, yes, okay.
Mhm.
Nancy Thorne. Nancy, nice to see you back again, too. Haven't seen you for a while. Nancy agrees. And Joe comes back with, the Second Amendment is overriding the First Amendment in the USA. Alarming. There's an interesting take on it, for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I think we've really given this a go around, and there's still lots to think about when it comes to the free speech and what you can say and hate speech, and we do have a new law that's been introduced related to not being harassed going into a place of worship and hate speech. So then you get into the division of well, is it hate speech or is it freedom of speech? And it's a never-ending circle. So, but we'll leave it at that for now. And still to come, the new Cold War, a dangerous game of cat and mouse. So if you're looking for a Canadian-based web service provider, you should have a look at Web Hosting Canada, WHC, a Montreal-based company with servers here in the east and out west. WHC provides a full range of web-based services at reasonable prices with the protection of Canadian privacy laws, and you're paying in Canadian currency. Boom. No hidden surprise exchange rate. You can get more information by clicking the affiliate link in the description below.
And Gary,
Yes.
it's been a hell of a week for us trying to pick up some great subject to talk about our show tonight, and I think we got a pretty good one here as well. Pretty tough one to talk about, which I'm sure we can spend hours discussing with our viewers. It's the incidents of fighter jets and drones that are flying into our rivals' nation's airspace, and which are increasing, especially between NATO allies Russia and China.
It's like I'm back in the 60s.
Yeah,
You remember
pretty
that
much.
growing up as a kid in the 60s? The Cold
Yeah,
War.
with the Russian bear bombers flying to northern Canadian space through Alaska. I mean, it's really scary, Gary. Like here, yeah, fine, we're here in Canada, but you know what? No country is too far from anything nowadays with technology and air forces around the world. So a lot of these are happening, and they're happening more and more frequently, Gary.
They are, and really they have not stopped since the Cold War era of the 60s into the 70s. On a regular basis, maybe not a regular basis, but frequently, you will have Russian jets coming over the north. And of course, we're scrambling and, NORAD. So you could have a mix of Canadian jets and American jets scrambling and flying out to meet them. And they kind of probably nod, give a wave, and turn their jets around and head back to Russia. But it's a test. They're testing how fast we can scramble, where the weak points may be, as far as, if we come in this direction, it's going to take them that much longer to get jets over here and intercept us. They're also just pushing. It's like, how a bully will needle you all the time, trying to get a reaction from you.
Right.
It's that kind of a thing as well. And now with the drones, like look in where was it? Copenhagen and Oslo. The
Right.
airports had to shut down because of the drones the other night. And apparently they were coming in and flashing lights on and off. And that's why they had to shut the airports down, because they could be flashing in pilots' eyes as they're on approach, or climbing out after taking off. And it was just an extremely dangerous situation. You had a couple of drones over in Latvia, wasn't it? And then, or was it the jets in Latvia and the drones in
Poland.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a push, and it's just a little needle all the time. And even yesterday in one of the speeches at the UN, and I don't recall now who it was, but made reference to the fact the world is a very dangerous place at the moment. And I've heard references to it's probably the world is the most dangerous place since back in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you and I had the opportunity to, we lived through that as kids, coming up through and into our teens. Like, remember the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember how tense this country was? And yes, we were living next to a military base. And yes, there was stuff going on at that military base that I still don't know, and because nobody would talk about it as far as preparations are concerned. But that was the first time where the world came as close to an all-out nuclear war as what we had up to that point. And I think we've been maybe close since then, but not like that, not where you were ticking down the time of the Russian ship with the missiles for Cuba.
Right.
How much longer it's going to be before it has to deal with the blockade that the U.S. had set up around the island. And that went right down to the very end, and it was a phone call between Kennedy and Khrushchev.
Yeah.
And they finally, worked each other's through and came to their senses, and away we go. But do you remember too? Like we had air raid sirens
Mm-hmm.
around our municipalities, and they would test those every so often. And I remember going to like the fall exhibitions and fall fairs, and there'd be like a civil defense booth set up, and had all of these pamphlets that you could get about building a bomb shelter in your basement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And while a video, or not a video at that time, but a movie was playing in the background about what happens when an A-bomb goes off, and the flash and everything. And Wayne and I were talking the other day about it, and I don't remember this in school, but he remembers doing drills. And it would be like, get away from the windows, turn your desks on their sides and hide behind your desks. Or if you're on your way home and you see the flash from the bomb, find a ditch. And he said to me the other day, he said, here I was a little kid, and I'm thinking, well, and he was very, very small, like lightweight. And he said, I'm thinking, that wind's tearing buildings off their foundations and trees, up by the roots, big trees. What chance do I have in the ditch as a skinny little kid? I'm gone. But that's the kind of things we were dealing with as kids growing up. And I wonder today, like if we got to a point of a Cold War where it had escalated to those levels, with the kids stressed out as it is with social media, I wonder, like, what would happen to them if they'd be able to kind of march on through anyway, if they could handle it, if it would be, just a...
Yeah.
It's a pretty scary thing to think about, because as I say, they're under a lot of pressure from social media and peer pressure at school and everything. I mean, yeah, we had peer pressure at school too, but not like it is now.
Well, you know what? And then there's the other side of the coin too, Gary. When we were growing up in the midst of in the midst of the real big Cold War with the threat of nuclear annihilation, um, I I'm not sure that our generation today would be as highly sensitized to the gravity of the situation as we were back then. And we've talked about this before about the generational divide and the attention spans and what's important to young people today and whatever else. Um, I really don't know one way or the other whether or not um, they're really following what's going on in the world. If indeed there is a second Cold War going on, maybe not to the level of a nuclear threat, but certainly conventional, a Cold War as it relates to conventional warfare. How often are they following up on what's going on? How many know that there was an incursion by the Russians into Eastern Europe countries? Not a whole hell of a lot, I don't think. Um, but at the same time, Gary, we're talking about Second Cold War. We remember the incursions into Canadian and North American airspace by Russian bombers and being politely escorted out by our scrambled jets, both Canadian and American. Um, what do you think is going on right now over in Europe? I mean, absolutely. There's a litmus test going on in terms of how far can I push the envelope? And I'll take
Exactly.
it one step further. Is the boldness of Vladimir Putin um, increasing as a result of inactivity by the other major powers in the world, namely the United States? I don't think I haven't seen anything of significance coming from the United States in terms of pushing the bear back, being the Russian bear. Very little, as a matter of fact. I think last week or the week before, the United States was declaring that they're going to be cutting back on military funding to some of these European nations that are bordered with Russia or with Belarus. Um, so I don't know. I just have this funny feeling that Putin has been emboldened by the lack of threat anywhere in the world. So he's seeing how far he can push. And so far, he has been pushing into the airspace of Bulgaria or Romania. I can't remember. Poland for sure, Estonia, and then you're looking at the drone incursions in Denmark and in Norway, where commercial traffic was ground to a halt. Um, and we really still haven't heard anything from the United States of anything substantial.
Well,
So
he said
I think this
yesterday,
incursion is going to continue getting more aggressive
oh, sure it
in the
will.
next few weeks to come, right?
Yeah, sure it will. But Trump said yesterday, he said, shoot them down. That's what
He
I
said that?
do. Yeah, he said that.
I,
Shoot them
I didn't
down.
know that.
Yeah, that's what he said to NATO. Shoot them down. However,
Okay.
and this is when you've got this is the issue. It's the risk of miscalculation and escalation. You know, uh, you
Yeah.
you get somebody like him, and because his Big Mac wasn't to his liking, then all of a sudden he says, blow them out of the sky, and we have a real incident on our hands. But that's what he was saying. But here's the other thing: when you really think about it, we've had some of the underwater cables cut
Hmm.
over in the European area, like offshore, over the last 2 years. At least three cable cuts, mysterious cable cuts. So you've had that. Sending drones in and shutting down two airports. Then there was the problem in London's airports. Was it over the weekend, last weekend? It had something to do with the baggage check-in system, the computer system,
Yeah,
and it
apparently they
went
were
down.
hacked. Yeah.
Yeah, and it went down, and imagine the chaos at Heathrow and Gatwick and the rest of them. So it's not hard, and then every day you're hearing about bad actors cracking into some companies' computer systems. So at this stage, you can rattle your nukes, but you don't necessarily have to use them if you can start using technology the way
Yeah.
that we're beginning to see the Chinese and the Russians use it. It doesn't take much to shut us down and create chaos and havoc. So I think, will we see a Cold War like you and I lived through? I don't think so. I think
But you're
that
speaking in terms of a nuclear Cold War, right? And
uh,
there's a difference.
yeah, we won't see that. I don't think we'll see again just the definition of a Cold War where you had the lines drawn, you had the wall in Berlin and
Hmm.
East Germany and West Germany and all of that. I think the lines are pretty much drawn now, so that part of it's kind of out of the way. But I think you're going to see the Chinese and the Russians stepping up because yes, Europe is on a massive military spending spree now to build up their military, but that takes time, Eddie.
Yeah.
That takes time. So they know Putin and the Chinese know that Europe is in a weakened state at the moment, and it's going to take them some time before they're up full. And NATO has weaker partners like Canada who we're doing the same thing, trying to get our military beefed up all of a sudden. But it takes time.
Correct.
So I think we're going to see more of that. And I think that they can, and they're probably thinking we can accomplish more now, not even like terrorists, some of the terrorist organizations, they've been fairly low key of late. And of course, they like the explosions and the big bangs. But more and more, I think you're going to see them also getting into more of the, playing with artificial intelligence, playing with telecommunications, and sending drones in and things like that, because it creates so much chaos and can just upset a nation in a heartbeat.
Well, yeah, exactly, Gary. I don't think we're going to see the Cold War that we see the spy books and historical Cold War as we saw it, which pretty much came to an end in the early '90s. Um, but by the same token, just to comment on what the Trumpster said about, well, I'd blow them out of the sky, wherever the case is. Well, that's the problem. He wants, in the good old days, the United States would be leading the charge in those countries and threatening to blow whatever out of the sky, right? So it's easy for Donald to say to Poland or Estonia or Latvia, well, just blow them out of the sky. What happens if they decided to do that? What do you think the government of the United States will say? Well, we had nothing to do with that. It was Latvia that decided to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that statement coming out of President Trumpster is rhetoric and false threats more than anything else. And smarter minds and more prevalent minds, take that as just Trump rhetoric and are not just arbitrarily blowing things out of the sky. As you heard the foreign minister from Poland basically warning Russia that we will take action and down anything further that comes into Polish airspace. Okay, now that I call a defensive threat, as opposed to just plain old rhetoric, where Trump basically says, "Well, blow them up, I would." Well, I'm sure that Vlad is laughing in his bed when he heard his comrade comrades say that and wake up the next morning and say, "Oh, you know what? Tomorrow I think we're going to send drones into Oslo's airport and see what happens." So I think the most dangerous thing right now is that the world got used to the leadership of the United States and taking a military lead against foe and supporting friend, and it just has not been there at least for the last 2 or 3 terms, if not all 3 terms, for whatever reason. Look, we had our problems here in Canada with leadership the last 10 to 15 years, in the United States as well. So I think some of these despots around the world, namely Vladimir Putin, are taking full advantage of that. And why wouldn't they? They're shrewd tacticians. And don't forget, Putin was head of the KGB. The guy knows what he's doing, and he knows how to manipulate, and he's taking full advantage of the situation. And I think, the rest of the free world has to hope that our leaders that are defending the borders here in Canada and defending the borders, especially in Europe, are up to the task in managing that threat. For how much longer, Gary? I really don't know, and that's the scary part. Even though we're a world away, an ocean away, it's still very, very scary to see what is in fact going on out there, and what are we going to wake up to tomorrow morning or the day
Yeah,
after? Anything
exactly.
can happen. That's the scary part.
So, in summary, rising tensions, airspace confrontations are becoming frequent and
Yeah.
normalizing brinkmanship. Uh, the tech factor that's involved, drones and new unpredictability and deniability, and
Mm,
global security. Any misstep could spark larger military conflicts.
yeah.
And so, these encounters may seem distant, but they set the tone for international stability, Canadian defense commitments, and the balance of power in an increasingly unstable world. And with that, Eddie, that's a wrap on episode 52.
Yes, sir. And for everyone out there, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a conversation. And help expose our streaming channel to more people like you. I'm Eddie Tekalik. Good night.
And I'm Gary MacDonald. And first of all, I want to say a special thank you to our director tonight, who was here last week as well, Jen. Great job again tonight, Jen, for keeping us flowing along nicely. So, I just want to leave you with this. If you're watching the replay, leave a comment below because we do want to hear from you. Honest, unfiltered Canadian, the conversation we should be having. From Montreal, I'm Gary MacDonald. Good night.